things we're dealing with are threats to humanity unlike anything the world has ever seen before.
We can bequeath our children a greener planet and a more prosperous future.
That's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
If unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet.
Zero Carbon
Eastall. Hello and welcome to Zero Carbonista Series 5, Just Stop the Tories. This is the UK's #1 environment-based podcast. If it's green, it is in. And you had a bit of a revelation this week, Dale, didn't you? Because we often do a feature called Right Wing Nut, but as you thought you were going to have a right wing nut story, and it turned out it was a kind of an anti-right wing nut story.
Well, I think it still is a right-wing nut story, but what you're talking about here is I went on the TV with Nadine Dorries, and I'd never met her before, and I thought, yeah, she's going to be a bit of a nut, probably. She was standing in for Julia Hartley-Brewer, right, who is a right-wing nut.
So all the signs were
all the signs
pointing you into the direction of inevitable destruction to your sanity.
She let me speak. We had a conversation. She was reasonable. I have to say I quite liked her. And I stopped doing Julie Hartley-Brewer because actually she only gets guests on there to listen to her. She don't let them speak. Well, in my case at least. So I can't bother. But Nadine was standing in. I have to say it was a decent chat. She's no fan of Sunak, so we had that in common.
I was going to say, I noted that on social media, that there is some synergy here, even if it is merely the utter dislike of the current Conservative Prime Minister.
You got to love it. I love it.
I see her around here and she's a very ordinary kind of person. She comes from an ordinary background. She's not part of the normal clique. And although some people will disagree with massive parts of her policy, but I thought the interview you had with her was completely fair.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah, I forget what we were even talking about. Oh, she bunged in COP26 Glasgow, said it was a massive win, it's telling me to be fair. And I didn't mind. I mean, there was a win in COP26. It wasn't massive, but, I thought that was a fair point. And it was all about net zero and stuff. And
I don't even know if she's going to vote for her own party for the election. Right. I don't even know if anybody's going to vote for the Tory party.
That's a good point.
There's a mega bombshell poll that predicts that there'll be 3/4 of seats will be lost. The Tories will lose 3/4.
Or a bombshell mega poll, to put it in probably in the right order of other adjectives they might be.
What did I say?
Mega bombshell.
Oh, a mega bombshell poll.
It's a bombshell mega.
Maybe it's a mega bombshell mega poll.
Because it's a mega poll, that's a fact. And I think the result is a bombshell. 80 seats left for the Tories. I mean, come on, 80, with Labour on 450, and historic majority. Bigger than Blair's, not the size matters. Yeah. But I mean, this government have done enormous damage with a majority of 80. Think of the good that Labour could do with a majority. I think it was forecast 250.
Yeah, it's interesting when you read polls, because I know they wobble around a bit and sometimes it depends on who does the poll. But nonetheless, I mean, let's just take it back to where it was. You just called it correctly. They had an 80-seat majority. And when Boris Johnson got the 80-seat majority, what was pretty much guaranteed with an 80-seat majority is that you don't just get one term, you get 2 terms, because an opposition party can't overturn an 80-seat majority. It's impossible. And yet here we are, just 3 or 4 years later, going, it's not just not impossible. In fact, it can be overturned so convincingly that an 80-seat majority will look daft compared to what the next government's going to get.
Well, it turns into 80 seats only, which is a big reversal.
An 80-seat majority to 80 seats only. That's
Gotta love it. Gotta love it. And this was a massive poll. It was 9 times as big in terms of participants as your average poll, which is why it's called a mega poll. And they used some kind of regression analysis of a new type that was used to correctly predict the outcome of the last 2 elections.
Wow.
So there's a kind of it oughtn't to be a rogue finding.
That would mean that Starbuck would have a majority that's bigger than, as you rightly say, anything that Blair achieved. Blair's majority in 1997 was 170. Thatcher's in 83, because 79 wasn't a landslide for her, but in 83 it was 143. They've always been the 2 kind of standout figures in relatively recent history. This would be in another territory.
It would nearly be as big as both of them combined.
Correct. We could keep going with this, couldn't we?
Yeah, but we should move on, really. We might lose some listeners.
Well, we're also, the other slightly sad news this week, of course, is we were technically in recession as of the figures from the last part of last year. And Sunak's pledges of course. One of them was to, grow the economy or whatever the heck it was. Hasn't, well, certainly not yet, worked out.
I was talking to somebody just today about this, actually. We were laughing or kind of observing the irony of the fact that the silver lining in all of the bad news is it's bad news for the Tories for the coming election and good news for Labour. So, yeah, we see the fact that we've had technically a recession. I say technically, I don't know why people say that. It's an actual recession, 2 quarters of negative growth in the economy. And actually, in the last 4 years, our economy has shrunk by 1%, right, since before COVID. And just to give that some context, in Europe, it's grown by 3%, so that's a 4% swing. And in the US, it's grown by 6%, which is a 7% swing. So the Tories can't say, oh, it's a global thing, Gov, right? No, it's not. It's a UK thing under Tory leadership. And yeah, this is good news. Actually, I believe we're in a recession. Sunak's pledge to fix the economy is, in pieces like all of his other bullshit.
Indeed. This from Kev, who says, Dale, I'm interested in an electric car, but live on a terrace road with on-street parking. Our own charge point is not practical at this point, but there are lots of properties on the road that have drives with charge points that are often unoccupied during the day. Is there tech that exists to use a neighbour's charge point, but for that electricity usage to be charged to my account rather than that of the occupier? This kind of flexibility could be a game changer.
There is. And I don't know the name of it, but there's an app for that, which is what people used to say a long time ago. So there is an actual app for that. Yeah, it's a bit like Airbnb. It's like Driveway B&B or something like that. It's not actually, that's not the name, but that's how it works. Yeah. And you can, you can book yourself a slot, go and plug in at somebody's house. It doesn't have to be a neighbor, anywhere in the country, and top your car up.
That's the kind of thing that you need, isn't it, really, in terms of the way forward? Because there isn't necessarily going to be a need for everybody to need a charging point. I mean, what's the point in you having one and your neighbour having one?
Well, yeah, and look, we've got 3,000 petrol stations in the whole country for 30 million cars. And there's a lot of angst about the lack of charging points. And as you say, not everybody needs to have one and stuff like this. The fact is the technology is moving so fast. 300-mile range is normal now. Give it a couple of years, it'll be 500 miles. Most people do 15 miles a day. 99% of all journeys are less than 100 miles, easily within the range of a battery. And I think the time is pretty much here now where you just need to top your car up once a week or once a fortnight like you did with a petrol car. And the chargers appearing everywhere. They're super fast. It might take 20 minutes at the moment. Give it a couple of years, it'll be just 10 minutes. Just, pop to your supermarket, plug in, buy something, off you go.
There it is. Here's a story. House building companies saved billions from Tory delays to low carbon rules.
Wow, this one is a scandal, isn't it? I mean, the house building industry new report, I think it was from the Financial Times, saved £15 billion through a series of Tory reversals of sensible policy. I'm just going to call it that. The projected cost to the owners of those new houses, it was all about new houses, is £45 billion. So it costs 3 times as much to do it after the event than before you build the bloody house. That's a stupidity that's baked in. But these same people, the house building industry, are one of the top 10 donors to the Tory party, having given them £40 million in the same period. And it just looks like a very obvious quid pro quo. You tear up some regulations that make us a shitload of money and we'll give you a shed load of money, kind of like
very
that.
Cynical, Dale.
Yes. And actually, this week also, we landed a story. We did some research. It's part of a kind of series of pieces that we're doing to highlight the fact that, what was it that Cameron said? He was going to cut the green crap. We did a study. One of the big things he did was in housing, and he scrapped the zero carbon home standard that the industry had built collectively between themselves voluntarily. They were ready to go. He came along and tore it up. Since then, about 10 years later, the cumulative cost to those householders in energy bills has been £3 billion. And in the peak of the energy crisis, it was costing them £1,000 a year each, thanks to David Cameron and his cutting of the green crap. And the point we're trying to make is, this green crap narrative is crap, actually. This green stuff is saving us a shed load of money. The other thing he did was to ban onshore wind, and the cost of that has been forecast by other people to be about £5 billion in the 10 years since he's done it. So £8 billion from cutting the green crap. Thanks, Dave.
He was a visionary, wasn't he?
He was a visionary. I
don't
know what he was looking at, but he was a visionary for sure.
This comes in from Tom, who says, what is your recent favourite climate success story, Dale?
I thought you were going to say, what is your problem? That's how them sentences
Dale,
usually
what's
go,
your
innit?
problem?
What is your problem, man? Well, I got a feeling there haven't really been any success stories. Oh, I tell you what, I think China reaching peak emissions, I think it's going to be this year or next year. I mean, that's a monumental event. It means their emissions will stop rising. And that's like turning around a supertanker, right? A country of 1 billion people that's actually on the development curve as well. It's not like the West that, that are hyper developed. And so they need to, use more stuff as well as make stuff.
Yeah.
But so I think China's renewable program as well, 5 years ahead of target. That's fantastic. I think they build 80% of the world's solar panels, for example. I mean, all of the stuff we need to get to net zero, most of it anyway, comes from China. And I think
so where do we, I know this is the old question then. So yes, China are making greater leaps in this area than almost any other country. But of course, the condemnation of China is that they are simultaneously doing more polluting than anyone else. Is that something that's going to tail off as their other hat kind of increases?
Yeah, and this is the story. This year or next year, they will reach peak emissions. So there's been a historical climb of their emissions. That's going to stop, and it's going to begin the great historical decline to net zero, which for a country that size, and for where they are in terms of industrialization and development, it's extraordinary. There's another story later in our agenda. Might as well have it now. Somebody's forecast that the cost of the energy transition globally would be 20% more if we didn't have China. It will cost an extra $6 trillion.
Wow. Because China's always pulled out the bag, isn't it? Every time you say anything about, lag your f***ing loft or, just be a bit more responsible with how you do this thing called life. Somebody goes, oh, yes, but what about China?
That's right.
And then you go, okay, that argument will soon disappear.
Yeah.
So when somebody says, what about China? You can just go, f*** off.
It's a stupid thing to say. I mean, it always was, right? Even if all of these other great facts aren't true, the fact that there's somebody else doing something bad shouldn't mean we shouldn't do the right thing, right? It's a terrible argument to make. But if you look at China's performance in renewable energy, it's incredible in their own backyard. And actually, they're enabling this rapid shift to net zero globally. Without them, an extra £6 trillion. That's the study. So that's the answer, isn't it? What about China? Thank God for China.
There it is. Shannon says, Dale, I've been loving your recent media interviews, especially how calm and courteous you always come across. She's watching the right person here. My question is,
She don't listen to the podcast.
How do you deal with nasty social media replies? And what is your advice for dealing with these kind of people? That's what usually happens, isn't it? You can have an interview, whether it's Channel 4, Talk TV, whoever it happens to be, Sky, BBC, and it can go absolutely fine. There might be a little bit of an argy-bargy in their healthy stuff. But then on social, there's almost another court gathers, the court of social media, and they don't kind of hold back if they don't like your views.
Well,
does it bother you?
Well, no, because what I don't see can't bother me, and I don't read them.
You see, that's the thing, isn't it? That's what you have to do. Just don't read that shit.
Yeah, that's right. And then it might as well not happen, right? It's like a Zen thing. If a tree falls down in a forest and nobody's there to witness it, did it happen? No.
The worst thing, I've discussed this with people who, I know a few people who spend hours, literally, and even, I mean, that's bad enough when you're not at work, but hours of their time at the weekend as well, replying to all the trolls and I just think, look, no one's paying you to do this, mate. Just ignore it, because the minute you reply, all that happens is they then reply, and you then want to reply, and you end up having 130 conversations with people. You don't even know them.
Yes.
These aren't people you know. They're not people that matter to you.
Well, they do matter, actually, but I think most of these people are beyond redemption, right? They're there for Barney, they're there to troll you and to say the most extreme stupid things, as well as abusive as well. So they don't matter in that sense. I mean, the wider audience matters, but I think that I reach them through the medium of either radio or TV or whatever it is, and the social media posting as well. Yeah. It's a great platform, but to have to engage with everybody's sometimes is rude or just bonkers opinion, well, I don't think that's necessary.
What I do find fascinating, there's many strands of fascination around social media, is how somebody with literally zero qualification to have an opinion has such a big opinion on something. Yeah. And it's that point that I think is kind of lost sometimes. I mean, social media is just full of unqualified shitheads, really. There's just a lot of people with big mouths and very small amounts of experience of the thing they are opining about.
And that description fits this current cabinet perfectly.
There it is. Atlantic Ocean circulation nearing devastating tipping point. What's this about, Dale?
Oh, yeah. We talked about this the other week, actually. It's our friend, the AMOC.
The AMOC.
The Atlantic Meridional overturning circulation. And there was speculation about it further north, I think, up around the Arctic, coming to a bad place. This is a system of currents that regulates the global climate. It's such an important thing. They're forecasting now, scientists are forecasting it will change at such a speed that adaptation will be impossible. And it changes the weather everywhere, in the Amazon, in Europe, just everywhere. What they're forecasting is a speed of collapse 10 times faster than the current heating trend, which makes that sound a little bit scary because we're not even dealing with the current heating trend right now. We aren't hauling that thing in. So, I mean, this is one of those warnings that's quite hard to understand at the moment if you're not a scientist, you're not deeply into this stuff, but it's a big, bad warning.
And staying with weather, hurricanes become so strong that a new category is needed. Me. That's a bit frightening, isn't it?
And much easier to get your head around, right?
We actually need a new category. It's so strong that the stuff we talked about now, there's no way of describing them via that. We need something different.
Yep, just another number as it happens. They're on a scale 1 to 5 at the moment, and we need a category 6. Lovely and easy to understand. We're talking about sustained winds of over 190 miles an hour. Hell, as you say. Or you nearly said.
So it's sustained winds. That's the bit. It's not like it's a bit gusty. And for 3 seconds it went to 192 miles an hour. No, sustained winds at that kind of, folk can't live in those conditions.
And it's happened 5 times, those conditions, in the last 10 years. It's going to happen 5 times in the next 5 years. You just know it.
Quick word before we go to a final question, Dale, on Veganuary, racking up big support for 2024 more than ever.
Yeah, despite the kind of campaign of interference funded by our government promoting eating cows and lambs and, stuff like that, Veganuary has just hit itself a new record. It does it every year. 25 million people. I think it's fantastic.
And a question, and I like this because it might feed into, I don't know, where you go next, Dale. Anne says, with Caroline Lucas leaving Parliament, she's the only Green MP, of course, is there a realistic chance of any Green Party gains? And I think also tacitly within that question is, would you step up to the plate, Dale?
Well, in the, what did you call it? The mega bombshell poll, actually, they forecast 2 Green seats, which is, it's a doubling. It's a 100% increase, but it ain't nowhere near enough. And just for that reason, partly, I think Labour are a good party. They've got social justice at the heart. They've got the green economy properly at the heart of what they plan to do and all that kind of stuff. So I don't need a kind of negative reason to support them. But often I'm asked, why aren't you with the Green Party, standing for the Green Party, that kind of stuff? And it's just a simple fact of our electoral system that the Green Party can't form a government, and we need a government now that gets it. Labour can be that government, so that's where I'm at.
There it is. Dale, we'll speak to you in a week.
I can't even wait.
That is, I thought you called me something.
No.
That's it for this episode, but make sure you follow this podcast. That way you get each new episode automatically. And of course, speaking of following, follow Dale on social media, twitter.com/DaleVince, and of course, facebook.com/DaleVince. And if you didn't know, TikTok too.
Zero carbon
east of